Hey guys, it's me. I'm back. I'm here to talk about your Chapter 2 FRQs. I want to go ahead and go over those, talk about the rubric a little bit so you guys can kind of check your answers. I know that all of you haven't finished them yet. Those of you who have, I've taken a look. Some of you look like you're doing pretty well. Others, I think, it's okay right now to look up answers. It's totally fine. In fact, I encourage that because answering these wrong is not going to help you prepare for the AP exam. So please do go to your notes, go to your textbook, and look for the answers if you aren't sure when you're answering them. But this first one came from last year. They just gave this one, but it is a pretty heavy research methods question. I know there's some other stuff in there that's not from Chapter 2, which is fine. And then the other one, I hope you recognize, we already did that one this year back when we covered Chapter 2 in class. So you were basically rewriting that one. We're using it as review because we know that we're going to see at least one of these free response questions having an emphasis on research methods. So give me 1 second. I need to pull up. Sorry, I have to have hard copies. So I'm going to pull up that question. We'll take a look. So you were asked to look at a bar graph. Here. So in that bar graph, you're looking at the children on Halloween or the annual activity of children wearing masks and going door to door receiving candy, because apparently saying Halloween would be maybe testing bias, if you remember what popular bias is from Chapter 11. But anyways, so the question says, psychologist is conducting a study at her home, an annual activity of children wearing masks and going door to door receiving candy. Some children arrived alone, others arrived in a group. Over the course of the night, the psychologist asked half the children to remove their masks when they arrived at her door. The remaining half kept their masks on. The psychologist told every child to take only one piece of candy. Then she went inside the house, leaving the bowl outside. This gave children the opportunity to take additional candy. The psychologist measured the percentage of children who took, oh great, just disappeared. Crap. She was looking at children who took additional candy. And her hypothesis was that they would take more candy when they were alone and that they would take more when they were masked. So they show you the results there in that bar graph. Sorry, I'm trying to find the best place to put this so I can get you guys. And you had to answer questions about that. So the first question, identify the operational definition of the variable in the study. This was a fairly simple point for you to score. I didn't grade this question at the AP reading this year, so I wish I would have. It would have made this a little bit easier. But the operational definition, remember, just to recap that real quick, is the statement of the procedure used in your study so that it can be replicated. So to replicate this study, define the dependent variable as whether the child or the children took additional candy. So it says that your response has to indicate that the operational definition is the percentage or number of children who took additional or extra pieces of candy. What they would not score, so what they told the readers do not score, is anything that would have indicated the independent variable. So you could not have talked about having a mask or no mask or being alone or being in a group. Those were the independent variables. And so that would not be scored. And also any reference to some candy, you had to make sure you specifically said additional or extra pieces of candy. But for the most part, as I glanced, most of you scored that. Now, I just want to remind you also when you're writing FRQs, and I will send out the how to write FRQs kind of tips that I gave you at the beginning of the year. I'll send that out again because I know many of you probably don't have it. But you don't need to write an excessive amount, but you need to write enough. So you need to write in complete sentences. So you need to make sure that your sentence begins with the definition of or operational definition of the dependent variable is. And then you would just simply say the percentage or the number of children who took additional or extra pieces of candy. That's like one sentence. That's easy, that's simple. Then you skip a line, which some of us are remembering to do and many of us are not. Skip a line, especially because you're going to be uploading images of these. Please make sure you skip that line and make it easier on your readers, because we're reading it from a computer now, which is going to be a much bigger pain, I think. But please don't forget that important little tip and detail. Okay, second point. I asked about, data support. The second point, or B, says explain how the data support or do not support each of the hypotheses. Well, basically, you're just looking at that graph. It's a very simple graph. I think you're going to have to read some type of a graph and analyze some type of data. This very clearly shows that the first hypothesis, that children would take more candy when they were alone, was not correct. You can see very clearly in that graph that children took more in groups than they did when they were alone. So the first hypothesis was not correct. The second, that they would take more when they were masked, you can see that that was correct. So when they kept their mask on, you can see the percentage went up as from when they remove the mask. So in your data support answer for B, just says responses must indicate that the data do not support the hypothesis that children would take more candy when they were alone, and that the data does support the second hypothesis that children would take more when they had their mask on. Again, very simple, not hard points to score, but you have to make sure that you're writing that in complete sentences and being very clear and concise. It seems that some of you, maybe because you're just turning this in to me, but it seems that some of you are not giving enough information. So please make sure you're writing enough that the reader can very clearly see you understand and that you are scoring that point. So you have to make sure that you're indicating very clearly hypothesis 1 and state what hypothesis 1 was, children alone, was incorrect. Hypothesis 2, children wearing masks, was correct. So I don't want to continue to be redundant, but I just want to make sure that you guys are giving yourselves the best opportunity to score as many points as possible. Then for point number 3, or C, it says explain why the psychologist cannot generalize her findings to all children. Now, there were several different answers that would have worked here, but when we want to generalize, you have to be able to say why. Number 1, there's a sampling bias. That would work. Or there was no random sampling or random selection in her procedure. Or you could talk about her only using children from her neighborhood, which again is a type of sampling bias. So it says to score examples to illustrate that the sample was not representative of the population. So as long as you gave some type of an example to show that it was biased, that it was not a representative sample, that would have scored you that point. It says do not score random assignment, and do not score insufficient sample size. Those two things alone would not have scored. You had to make sure that you talked about the representative sample not being there. And remember, random assignment is for experiments, not, in this case, she was not conducting an experiment, okay? Okay, point D or 4, naturalistic observation. So in this case, explain why the study is not a naturalistic observation. Well, that's because, and most of you got this point right, she was manipulating the subject. So responses must indicate that it's not naturalistic observation because she's interacting with her subjects, or she's manipulating the variable by asking them to take their mask on or off, would be manipulation. So therefore, it is not their naturally occurring environment. Simple answer. Then point 5 says, and that's E, explain how each of the following might have played a role in the children's behavior. I told you to skip de-individuation because that's a social psych term. So the first one was modeling. Again, we all should know this was chapter 6. This is Albert Bandura. We talk about modeling, talking about imitating the behavior of others. So you could give a quick, definition there, but it says responses must indicate in reference to taking candy, children are imitating what they saw others do. So you would talk about, modeling, you know, seeing the other kids take extra pieces of candy, so they take extra pieces of candy. Says references, score references to modeling that occur outside of the situation and the influence taking candy. Parents modeled stealing candy in the past, leading to children taking more candy. They would score that if you use that example. It says do not score references to children's obedience. So when we talk about modeling, we're just simply talking about imitating the behavior that you have observed. So it's observational learning. You see it, you imitate it. Again, most of us scored that point pretty easily. And then the last point, because there was no de-individuation, is Kohlberg's pre-conventional stage. So I want to remind you about Kohlberg. This is from our development chapter, which was chapter 9. We'll get to that. Remember, there were 3 stages. It's moral development. So when we are making moral decisions, right from wrong, when we are pre-conventional, Kohlberg says this is before the age of 9. So basically, we don't have the capability, according to Kohlberg, before the age of 9 to really make decisions of morality beyond what benefits us or what will help us avoid punishment. So you needed to somehow indicate that these kids were making the decision to take or not take extra candy based upon either gaining reward. So remember, pre-conventional, it's all about self-interest, or avoiding punishment. So either they didn't take more candy because they didn't want to get in trouble, or they did take it because they wanted it for themselves. It was to gain the reward. So remember, it's not until, because I read some of your responses and some people talked about social approval and friends being present. That is when we get into conventional, that we talk about upholding rules and laws or trying to gain social approval. So pre-conventional, and again, we operate in pre-conventional even as adults, but pre-conventional is where all of our moral decision making is just based on our own self-interest, gain reward, avoid punishment. And then just as review, post-conventional, remember, that is where we follow our own internal ethics, even if it does get us into trouble. So breaking pre-conventional, even if we are going to be punished, and even if it does break the law, which would go against conventional morality. Okay. So that wraps up the first question. If you have questions, email me, or I was going to tell you this before I'm done. I am going to start on Sundays having optional Google Meets, where I will just invite all of you. And if you want to hop on and ask me questions, or if you just want to get on and listen, or if you just want to get on and be like, hey, what's up? Like, I would love to see your faces. So we're going to do that. We're going to do that this Sunday. I'll send out an invite today or tomorrow. And Sunday evening, which I'm hoping is a time that most of you will be available, that your other teachers won't be meeting. It's up to you. If you want to hop on, see some familiar faces, ask questions. The goal will be to do one each Sunday, where you can, for this Sunday, the questions should revolve around chapter 1 and 2 review. So anything that comes up in these FRQs, anything that comes up in your review packets that you want to ask questions about, hop on, ask them. You can type in comments in the Google Meet. So if you don't want to, turn your mic on and talk, you can just type in the question and I can address it to the whole group. Whatever's easiest. Don't know how this is going to work with 100. I don't think all of you are going to get on. I'm hoping that you'll, humor me a little, and some of you will join me, but I'm going to start that. We'll try it this Sunday. If it is an overwhelming amount of people and we want to break them up into different sessions, we'll explore that. But I do miss seeing you guys a lot. So I would like to, more than just send you these videos, I'd love to have some live virtual interaction. So, okay. Next, the second one, the one that we've already done. So you guys probably recognize this one. This is from an AP exam. It's an older one, but this is the question about Dr. Johnson, who's investigating the relationship between stress and physical illness. So she persuades high school principal to require all female athletes in the school to participate in her study. She explained the purpose of her research to the athletes and asked them to use a standard form to rate the severity of their stress over the last 6 months. More than 250 athletes completed the form. She then analyzed the forms returned by the first 100 athletes. She requested the attendance records from the nurse's office for each of those athletes to verify the number of days absent due to illness during the same 6-month period. In the debriefing summary that she sent to the 100 athletes after she completed the study, she stated that athletes who reported more stress also experienced more physical illness, concluding stress causes physical illness. So this is just, again, more chapter 2 review. I know you've done this before, but I still saw people just not giving enough. You've got to make sure that you're answering everything fully. So for question 1, very simple, identify the research method that was used by Dr. Johnson. That was easy. Dr. Johnson used, you could have said, a correlational study. You could have said she's using a survey or questionnaire. Any of those would have been fine for answering and getting point number 1. Second, it asked based on the information, I'm ahead of myself. Describe the operational definitions of the 2 key variables that she used. So again, there's that term operational definitions again. In this case, you have to give both variables, the independent variable. So first, we're looking at stress, and does your level of stress have an effect on physical illness? So how did she define stress? You could have said that she used a stress severity rating. You could have talked about how she used a standard form or a stress questionnaire, stress scores, something of that nature to indicate that, she used a standard form or a test, a questionnaire to rate severity of the athlete's stress. And then for the second variable of illness, you just needed to indicate that she defined illness based on the number of days that the athletes were absent. You did not have to talk about that being specifically due to illness. You just need to say using either number of days absence, or you could have said their attendance records could also be your operational definition. And then it says, based on the information provided, what is one appropriate and one inappropriate ethical feature? So when we talk about appropriate, you could have said first that she shared the statement of procedure. So when we talk about ethics, remember the big ones I pointed out in your review were informed consent. So you could kind of say, well, she shared the statement of purpose, which, maybe we could say is some form of getting consent, or at least they knew what they were getting into. And then she debriefed. So debriefing is another appropriate thing that she did. However, it's inappropriate that she had the principal force them to participate, because so technically there was no informed consent. Even though she shared that statement of purpose, she did not, they did not have the option to participate. They were forced to. And then you could also talk about how she didn't get their permission to look at their attendance records. And then you could have used debriefing here as well. She only debriefed 100, not all 250. You couldn't use that twice, though. And I talked to you about this when we went over this in class. You could only use debriefing to score either the first point, appropriate, or the second point for inappropriate ethical feature, but one or the other. So there's that. And then the next point, sorry, I'm on the wrong computer, was the statistical technique that she can use to represent the relationship between the variables. Since it's a correlational study, this would have been very simple. She could use a scatter plot. So you could say, she could take the scores and the number of days absent and plot them on a scatter plot to look at the correlation of the 2 variables. She could also use, you could have said a correlation coefficient would also determine the relationship between those 2 variables. And then the 2 aspects of the research design that weaken the validity. Now, for this one, this is where you need to be specific. And so when we talk about this research, I just want to make sure that if you get something like this, you score the points by using the right terminology. So what weakens the validity? Number one, she says that stress causes physical illness. Well, we all know correlation is not causation. So causation cannot be established because she did not conduct an experiment. So you want to talk about that correlation, not causation. And then you could just say, the cause could be reversed. That illness could cause stress. You could say that, could be a completely, different variable. A third variable could be what causes stress. But, correlation cannot show causation. And then you could talk about her ability to generalize because she does not have a representative sample. So just like in the first question, talking about why it's not representative. Well, she's only testing girls. She's only testing athletes. She's only testing, high school students. One of those would work for 1 point. Okay. But what you need to make sure you indicate is that only testing girls or only testing athletes means she does not have a representative sample. That's that kind of key word your reader's looking for, that you understand what a representative sample is and why it's important to validity and conclusions of research studies. You could talk about her sampling. That's a sampling bias because she only the first 100 surveys collected, so she did not use a random sample. And so we've talked about what a random sample is. That's another one of those like keywords they're going to look for. No random sample, so a sampling bias. You could have talked about her measures, her operational definitions not being precise enough. So, for example, attendance records, just because you're not at school doesn't necessarily mean you're sick. You could be missing for college visit, you could be missing for other reasons. So there's that as well. And then anytime we're dealing with a survey, there's always the question of response bias. There's always, the possibility of people not telling the truth, social desirability, maybe not answering quite honestly about their actual level of stress on that questionnaire. So any of those things would have scored you those points. So there's that. Overall, looking at the FRQs that have been turned in so far, they look pretty good. I think we'll be okay with research methods. Keep my fingers crossed. But again, Sunday would be the day we'll hop on together and we'll talk and hopefully clear up any questions that you have, because Monday we're going to hop right into chapter 3 and 4 review next week. So I want to make sure that we feel pretty comfortable, mostly with chapter 2. There's a few things from chapter 1 that I want, to make sure we talk about, but I've indicated all of those major terms for every chapter that's going to be on this exam, and I'll have review packets for you for 3 and 4 next week. So be ready for that. But I hope to see most of you on Sunday, and come with questions or just cool stories or whatever. Like, I'm just looking forward to seeing some of your faces. So and if you can't jump on, or you don't want to, or whatever, that's fine too. Just send me an email if you have any questions. I'll be happy to get right back to you. So all right, guys, have a good rest of your weekend, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.